Well, here we go, folks. Doug Ford has called an early election, despite having 16 months left on his current majority mandate.
Putting an end to weeks of speculation, Doug Ford has confirmed rumors that he will be holding an early election. Despite already holding a majority, 79 out of 124 seats in the legislature, Ford is saying he needs the largest mandate in Ontario's history to continue conveying the message that Canada is not for sale. Even in his own Etobicoke riding, some are questioning whether Ford is being opportunistic.
Totally waste of money.
Yeah?
Total waste of money. He lost my vote.
He says it's because he needs a mandate to fight Donald Trump's threatened tariffs. That, my friends, is simply laughable. Let's be honest. Doug Ford will be nowhere near any negotiating table with Donald Trump. For starters, international trade is strictly a federal government responsibility. And at the very best, Ford will be in some obscure back room with 9 other premiers. But more than likely, he'll be sitting in his Queen's Park's office waiting for a phone call. When NAFTA 2.0 was being negotiated, the premiers were simply consulted when the negotiations touched upon provincial responsibilities. No, this is not about attaining a strong mandate to fight Donald Trump. That's a fairy tale. This is nothing more than a corrupt politician engaging in crass political opportunism. Ford has seized upon the ramblings of a lunatic in the White House who has scared the living bejesus out of every politician in Canada. Ford has actually stolen the mantle of Captain Canada at a time when the federal Liberals are in a leadership campaign. Now, not only do we have the federal government shut down in a time of crisis, but now because Ford sees a political opportunity to pull the wool over the eyes of Ontario voters, he's decided to shut down the Ontario government. And if that's not enough stupidity, the man has mailed out $200 checks to bribe every man, woman and child in the province, just days before he calls an early election. Come on, folks. Are we really this stupid that we cannot see through this scam that this con artist is trying to pull off? He is literally peeing away $3.5 billion of taxpayers' money that should be spent on fixing the healthcare system, which he has put into crisis. And by the way, this is on top of the $1.5 billion he paid to the LCBO so he could get wine and beer into corner stores a few months early. And for those of you watching this video and who perhaps were not around during the 1990 Ontario election, back then we had another premier. This guy was called David Peterson, who also had a majority mandate with 12 months left on that mandate. He assumed, just like Doug Ford, that voters were a bunch of gobshites and who cared less about an early election. Well, he gambled and he lost. The voters saw through his crass political opportunism and basically booted him out of office. Doug Ford deserves that same fate. Judging by a poll out this week, voters are not happy with Doug Ford's decision to call an early election. In fact, he is tanking in the polls.
Let's break down the numbers more, though, with David Valentin, principal at Liaison Strategy. David, thanks for coming in this morning to release some of these numbers here. What is your headline take from this poll that you've just conducted over the weekend?
My headline is that the early election call is influencing numbers for now and not in the direction that Premier Doug Ford wants. We've been seeing ever since the new year, week after week after week, more early election speculation and also the Ontario Liberals going up week over week over week to the point that they've gained so much now that it's outside the margin of error. And they're gaining consistently in regions that are important to them, Northern Ontario, the 905, and the city of Toronto.
But make no mistake, his poll numbers are not only because of the early election scam. His record in office is simply abysmal. Regardless of which metric one looks at, everything this guy touches turns to mush. Healthcare is a total mess since he took office 7 years ago. Staff shortages in hospitals has reached a critical point in all of our hospitals and long-term care facilities.
Ontario is facing an unprecedented staffing crisis in our hospitals, in our long-term care, in our home care.
I have nurses who cry before they even get into work.
They drive home in a car and they cry.
Someone has just gone to be a waitress so that she can get a day off.
Their anxiety level is to the max.
Because people cannot continuously work the way they're working.
Leading into the pandemic, Doug Ford cut hospital funding to below the rate of inflation. By the time the pandemic began, Ontario had the fewest hospital beds left of any province in Canada.
However, this disastrous situation is not confined to our hospitals only. Primary care is in deep, deep crisis to the point where the Ontario Medical Association is saying that 2.5 million Ontarians are without a family doctor. And that number is only going to grow over the coming years, they say. Let's take a look at what the OMA has to say.
The Ontario College of Family Physicians now says there are 2.5 million Ontarians without a family doctor, and medical professionals are concerned about this growing trend.
This will continue to be a problem if we don't start to implement solutions now.
According to new data, more than 160,000 people were added to the list of those without a family doctor in a 6-month period alone.
We've also done research that's shown that it's not just about the number of people without a family doctor, but almost 7% of Ontarians, or 670,000 patients, are driving a really far distance to see their family doctor, so more than 51 kilometers.
Local residents are feeling the struggle. How long have you been looking for a doctor now?
3 years. 3 years, yeah. And then when I call places, I usually get told that they have a wait list. Or they're not accepting new patients.
Extremely hard. I called like 20 clinics, and this was during COVID, so I don't know if that made a difference, but they were not accepting new patients at all.
Now let that sink in. 2.5 million Ontarian residents without access to a family doctor. That is a shocking statistic that is clearly caused by Doug Ford's mismanagement and privatisation of the healthcare system. Ford cannot blame this debacle in healthcare on Kathleen Wynne or the NDP. He owns this mess and should be made to pay for it by getting booted out of office. Do not be conned by his Captain Canada bravado about fighting Donald Trump. His early election call is little more than an attempt to get out ahead of an RCMP report that is looking into his government's shady dealings, where he sold off major chunks of Ontario's greenbelt to his developer friends. According to the Auditor General's report, the bidding process was rigged to favour his developer pals.
The RCMP has launched a criminal investigation into the Ford government's Greenbelt land swap. The now cancelled plan would have seen housing built on protected lands.
Well, Hannah, we have a statement from the RCMP confirming this investigation. The National Police Force saying that its Sensitive and International Investigations Unit has launched an investigation into allegations associated to the decision from the province of Ontario to open up parts of the Greenbelt for development.
On the housing front, we all recall his promise during the last election to build 1.5 million units of affordable housing. Well, surprise, surprise, none of that has happened, and in fact, the housing shortage in Ontario has worsened and housing starts are down.
Time for business news with Ari Rabinovich, and hello, Ari.
And Cynthia.
Now, we've talked a lot about Canada's housing shortage, but there are some encouraging signs on that front tonight.
Yeah, but it really does depend where you look, Cynthia. But most of the gains were seen in Alberta, Quebec, and Atlantic provinces. In fact, so far this year, housing starts in Montreal are up by 15% compared to last year, so that's one of the fastest growing urban areas. But when we look at Ontario and British Columbia, those provinces are down substantially.
His unemployment numbers are no better. Ontario's jobless rate is basically the highest in Canada. In January of 2023, the unemployment rate was sitting at 5.3%, with 520,000 Ontarians out of work. And in December of 2024, that number has jumped up to 7.6%, with 700,000 Ontarians without a job. That's Doug Ford's record when it comes to unemployment in this province. The man has basically put hundreds of thousands of Canadians out of work. And here he is now looking for an extra mandate, supposedly to fight Donald Trump. Give us a break. So to wrap this video up, let's take a look at the man. We have a con man who called an early election to ostensibly fight Donald Trump's threatened tariffs on Canadian goods. In reality, he's running away from an RCMP investigation into his government's corrupt practices around the sale of Greenbelt land to his developer buddies. He's running away from the crisis his government created in the healthcare system. He's running away from his gift of $2.5 billion to a private sector spa company in Toronto. He has frittered away $3 billion in order to bribe voters into voting for him in this election. And $1.5 billion he paid in penalties to the LCBO in order to get beer into the corner stores a few months early. This man is actually reckless when it comes to taxpayers' dollars. He is no guardian of the public purse. Ontario cannot afford another 4 years of this con man. It is time to give Doug Ford the boot. You've been watching Straight Talk with Sid Ryan.